Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with our friends from Megaplant IT. My name is William Bell, Executive Vice President of Products at PhoenixNet, and we have a great topic today. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity and compliance concerns for the modern business, specifically in use cases around hybrid workforce and what that means to the businesses of today. As everyone knows, we're faced with some immense challenges as a country in the United States, as a world, and as business leaders. And hopefully, some of the things that we're going to discuss today can give you some new ideas. They can make you think about some things that maybe you haven't thought of before. And I'm really, really excited for the content. So we'll jump in and get going. For those of you that don't know me, again, I am William Bell, Executive Vice President of Products at PhoenixNet. I have a passion for information security. It's where I started my career, and before we were building interesting and exciting infrastructure products, I was focused every single day on security and compliance. With that, I also want to point out that PhoenixNet as an infrastructure company cares deeply about security. And I think that that's why our relationship with Megaplant IT is so great and so special. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Mark Butler, who was with Megaplant, and he is, running their information security program as the CISO. And he's got a lot of great content today that he's going to be able to share with you guys. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, William. I appreciate the introduction. So welcome, everybody. I'm glad you're here, and we're looking forward to sharing this content with you. And again, as William stated, I am the CISO for Megaplant IT, responsible for overall technical strategy, virtual CISO advisory services, and business development. I have a lot of different experiences in my career, and I've worked for vendors, I've worked for startups, I've worked for consulting companies, worked for Fortune 500 companies running their security programs, and hopefully that will provide you with some additional perspective of what it's like to not only run security programs, but what it's like to be assessed from an outside entity perspective. And then also what you can do from an infrastructure and a capability standpoint to best position your company moving forward, with these new hybrid workforce challenges. All right, let's get into our agenda. So we've covered introductions, and I'll go into a little bit about who Megaplant IT is, and William will cover PNAP as well as a list of our services that are available. We're going to get into the business challenges for the hybrid workforce. We're going to talk about endpoint risks and threats. We're going to talk about requirements for becoming and maintaining compliance for remote environments, which is definitely something of interest for any organization that has a compliance scope or a regulation or even a risk assessment being done. Regardless of where it came from or what the regulatory body is, making sure that those remote environments are maintained in a secure manner is definitely very important, and we will cover that in detail. We will go through what does it look like to be assessed from a security services standpoint when you can't visit and there's no on-site visits or validation of the environments. What does that look like, and how does that work? We'll also go into a set of recommendations and next steps, and then we'll also talk about the capabilities of both of our organizations from a certification and sponsorship standpoint. And at any time during this webinar, you can submit a question, you can submit your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be glad to take those into account and make sure we can try to answer those at the end. There's also a poll question as well, which we will get to. But appreciate your time today. All right, a little bit about Megaplant IT. We're a security and compliance consulting firm. We have almost 50 high-level services that cover managed security, 24/7 SOC as a service, managed SIEM, managed vulnerability, managed endpoint, managed detection and response. We also have a penetration testing practice, which covers continuous penetration testing of application environments, network environments, cloud environments, mobile code, application code reviews. And then we also have our foundational compliance practice. And we started out doing compliance assessments in 2009, and we've helped hundreds and hundreds of companies obtain compliance and then also maintain that compliance over time, which is actually the most important part of running a security program effectively. We are a contributor to the Verizon Payment Security Report, and we're very excited about that because that allows us to share our expertise and our experience with the broader market. And Verizon produces a couple reports every year. One is the data breach investigation report, but they also produce a payment security report, which is even more specific to payment security and the ecosystem around it. We are SOC 2 certified as a managed security services provider. We do have our PCI service provider compliance as well from a security operations center standpoint, which are also helpful to know. And just as an overview of our compliance, our security testing, and our managed security areas, these are representative of all the different services that we can offer, but we have three main buckets or service areas. And as I mentioned, the compliance assessments, PCI, ISO, NIST, HIPAA, et cetera. We have a couple new offerings in there like the California Consumer Privacy Act, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and security testing, as I mentioned, is really becoming more continuous instead of ad hoc pen testing, which is very popular with a lot of our client bases. And then our managed security services, as I mentioned, the full 24/7 SOC as a service, the ability to handle managed network detection and response, managed endpoint detection and response, and then vulnerability program management for our companies and clients are very, very helpful. So we tried to provide as broad of a service and service set as possible. And we do that for multiple reasons, because most of the organizations that we deal with have challenges in logging and auditing, for example, or they may have challenges with security staffing, or they may have challenges with their platform providers, right? And they're looking for better ways to handle that in a secure manner. But they also need to assess their environments on a regular basis to make sure that what they think is in place is actually in place from a security configuration and deployment perspective. So we try to handle all sides of the assessment side from an auditing perspective, the testing side from a validation perspective, and then the managed security services side from an operational standpoint. And we find that this is a really good blend of capabilities to offer our clients. And our clients are very excited about the complementary set of services that we offer as a partner. All right, William, I'll turn it over to you for who's Phoenix Snap.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Mark. So, for a lot of you on the call, you might not know who Phoenix Snap is. We have been in the infrastructure business for 11 years, building world-class facilities and infrastructure deployments across the globe. We have a focus on secure infrastructure and availability. So if you look at like backup and disaster recovery and production enterprise hybrid cloud. So that's kind of our main focus areas. There's a billion products around that, but if you look at kind of like from a pillar perspective, that's what it looks like. And we're helping businesses get to that next level in their security and availability journey, right? I think that with our partner community, guys like Megaplant IT, we can get customers all the way there, right? But it really takes that consultative approach. And at the end of the day, Phoenix Snap is an infrastructure business, right? So it's kind of that taking that working together that makes everything so special in kind of what we do. So hopefully this is built out completely for everybody. If you take a look at the footprint that we have across the globe, we're expanding this. We're putting more services in different locations as quickly as we can and trying to build up our capabilities in each region so that at least in 6 to 10 maybe a couple more eventually, locations around the globe, you can get the entire service portfolio. So that's kind of a goal we have today, and we're working very diligently on that. Some of you may know us as a great data center in Phoenix, Arizona. That's our namesake. That's our flagship facility. We spend a lot of time working with businesses in the Southwest, but it's by no means or even close to the extent of our capabilities and kind of what we're delivering across the globe today. And I'll give it back to Mark.
Thanks, William. So our topic today really at a high level is speaking to the concepts of business continuity and the resilience capability of a business to absorb impacts, whether it would be geography impacts, whether it would be staffing shortages, whether it would be obviously a global pandemic like we're all dealing with now. But regardless of where that particular challenge would come from, whether it would be resources or geographic challenges, storms, weather, outages from a technology standpoint or a technology provider standpoint, the continuity of the business is paramount. And everybody has some type of business continuity plan. Everybody has some type of disaster recovery plan. And, going through the capabilities of those plans and the effectiveness of those plans is really, really important. And a lot of organizations had a crash course, is the best way to say it, over the last few months of, how are we going to maintain our operations? How are we going to maintain our resilient capability to service our customer base, to deliver our products and services? And how do we do this with a very different delivery model when everybody is remote, right? So the COVID situation, the pandemic situation obviously is what it is, but we have to take a look at not only just issues that can affect where we work and how we work, but also you have to take into account other things that can affect the business from either an availability perspective, a staffing perspective, a technology perspective, or and even a cyber attack standpoint. So the continuity and resilience framework really is important. And if you have not had the opportunity to refresh your business continuity plans and your disaster recovery plans and to test those out over the last few months, that would be surprising, because every organization has had to enable different ways of working, different support models, different connectivity methods, different applications, and work with multiple sets of partners to continue to deliver the services. And it's really important to make sure that those themes of continuity and resilience are maintained, they're prioritized, and all the plans that support them are updated. And we really want to support that from a business availability, a business revenue, and a business viability perspective going forward. So let's talk about how productive is remote work. So the topic today is the hybrid workforce. So how productive is remote work from a statistical standpoint? And this is an interesting set of statistics, because most people that filled out these surveys said, I work more hours than I do typically, right? So if you go down to the bottom of the chart, 55.2% work more hours during COVID-19 than they did pre-COVID-19. Now, 55% working more hours is really a challenge, because you're integrating your work life and your personal life and your home life, right, into this new life and this new normal. So only 14% said they worked the same hours, but 30% said they actually worked fewer hours, which is interesting. So, the work hours are increasing for the majority of people. And then from a productivity standpoint, 31% said they were more productive, 23% they were considerably more productive, 22% said they were slightly less, and then 17% had no change. So it's interesting to look at the statistics around remote work, hybrid work, and as companies are planning to bring staffing back into offices, they're doing it in different ways. They're either doing it in a staged manner, they're doing it based on a percentage of the workforce in the office can can be 25 to 50% of what it was with appropriate spacing and areas that are being reconfigured from a floor space and workspace perspective. And we have to look at the reality is that the workforce and how we actually get things done has been permanently altered. And not only do we have to get used to this new work style and work patterns, the ability to go back into an office like we did before is obviously permanently shifted. So something that we need to be aware of, and we also need to balance that out with our capability to continue to produce for our clients, our businesses, and our customers. So when we look at the hybrid workforce and going into the future, so this survey question was really about, are you going to change your policies? Are you going to alter your remote workforce policies? And it's interesting because 86% of company owners and executives said they would implement a new remote work policy. So 86% said, yes, we will change our policies. 4% said they'll adopt a fully remote capability. 27% said they'll adopt a remote first and then use some type of augmented or rented space for large gatherings. So that's 27% that are not going to have offices going forward, but they'll have some type of ad hoc meeting areas with a remote first setup. 55% said, yes, we'll adopt a more flexible working arrangement, remote work days, etc. Most organizations supported some type of remote work on a limited basis, but 55% said, we're going to institute this for everyone, not just for particular roles that either requested it or we felt like it was a good fit in the past. And then interestingly enough, 13% said, no, we will return to work as before. And I think this is an interesting 13% statistic, because I think that, depending on the business and depending on the clients and the services being provided, I think that's probably a little bit higher than what it will end up being, because I think everybody's work has been permanently changed. But it's interesting to look at the statistics around, what's the hybrid workforce going to be in the future. So as I mentioned before, the continuity and resilience aspects, making sure that organizations are looking at threats to its operations, right? And threats can mean cyber attacks, they can mean targeted attacks from a competitive standpoint, or geopolitical or political, or even data-oriented attacks, right? From a cyber standpoint, but it's also broader than that. It can also mean resource staffing issues and geography-based issues. It can mean competitive pressures coming in and changing the market in some way, shape, or form from a disruptive player, from an innovative, disruptive competitor. And as we look at the remote workforce, we have to look at the systems that they have access to, the data they have access to. What does the environment look like that they're connecting from and to? The service providers that are providing access into applications, APIs, the third-party data sharing that happens in a lot of large organizations from a marketing and data analytics perspective. And then third parties. Third parties are a huge risk area. They're a huge benefit from getting specialized services from a supply chain standpoint. Most organizations use multiple third parties for all kinds of different specialized purposes, and that will continue. But also, you need to understand how those third parties are integrating with your remote hybrid workforce and your technology environment. Now, as we look at, scoping and maintaining compliance. So maintaining compliance is really important, not only from a regulatory and a oversight perspective, but how do we maintain compliance in a new environment where our workers are remote, the systems they access are typically cloud-based or SaaS, software as a service provided, or they're connecting into a secure environment, like Phoenix Snap offers from an infrastructure perspective. So you not only have to look at, what could happen from an event perspective, that could impact the organization. A lot of organizations have deployed remote access in a very quick fashion. We've had multiple clients come to us and say, we've enabled or expanded our remote connectivity options for all of our workforce. We need you to test out and do an assessment against our technology stack to make sure that we did it right and to make sure that we're not exposed in some way, shape, or form because we rushed the capability for every single employee to work remotely. And even as employees are trying to get back into an office environment to a limited degree, we know that the remote workforce is here to stay, and the technology stacks that support them are also here to stay. And so there can always be configuration issues. There can be software exposures. There could be vulnerabilities in the platforms that we leverage. There can be monitoring gaps from a logging and auditing perspective. And there can also be training that needs to be specific to, what does it look like to operate in a trusted and secure manner in a home network that may have some additional traffic on that home network that you typically don't have within a corporate office environment. And so all of these things need to be taken into account, as well as updating policies and procedures to have a remote work policy, a remote work set of procedures and processes, and how do you support these remote workers in hostile environments from a networking perspective, where a lot of other things are going on from either social media or gaming or network traffic perspective that you typically don't have in a corporate environment. So we need to take a look at the endpoints, and the endpoints are super important because they're the primary attack point from an internet access. They're a primary attack point from email, from attachments within emails, from phishing attacks that are targeted to certain individuals in the organization. If you're familiar with phishing attacks, or even, there's obviously mobile devices, there's endpoint laptops and workstations, there's attacks being targeted toward, SMS or phone-based phishing attacks, as well as email-based phishing attacks. And so all of these capabilities from an endpoint perspective need to move beyond traditional antivirus, traditional signature-based detection, because most of the signature-based detection capabilities of antivirus are probably 20% or less effective, and that will continue to go down. The next generation of endpoint detection and response tools are readily available, they're proven, there's multiple vendors to select from just based on your size, scale, and complexity. But ultimately, they're going to be looking for behaviors. They're going to be looking at processes that are running. They're going to be looking at files being accessed. They're going to be looking at communication out to suspicious domains or URLs or destinations. They're also going to be looking for, process hijacking or other types of process injection situations where traditional antivirus is just not going to identify it. So really the endpoint recommendation here is to take a look at what you have today from an endpoint security perspective and make sure that you're using a next generation tool, which is going to be endpoint detection and response with the ability to prevent malicious files from loading, prevent malicious hashes from loading. And then also it's going to look at the behavior of that system over time to understand what accounts are being accessed, what data is being accessed from a destination perspective, what applications are being authorized on a regular basis. And then if there's anything unusual going on that workstation or that laptop. So the ability to log and audit all the events on an endpoint are definitely very, very important. And that's where the endpoint logging and audit team comes into play. And typically this would be integrated into a security operations center, which would also be looking at vulnerability data. It would be looking at network traffic. It would be looking at access control logs, and then also the endpoint logs of the the memory, the files, the processes, and then the behaviors of those endpoints will definitely give a complete picture of the risk posture that you can manage going forward. And one last thing on the endpoints, just making sure that you have a good asset inventory and making sure that all of your endpoints are covered from an agent perspective and a logging perspective. And this will be a combination of, every known asset from a purchasing and a configuration database, but also what else is communicating to your devices and laptops and environment, and then making sure that any new systems that get deployed or bring your own device systems are also covered from an agent perspective and a monitoring perspective. And the other thing that will come into play here moving forward is really the kind of the zero trust model of making sure that we know who's sending traffic across the network, what endpoint did it come from, was that endpoint secured and updated from a hygiene perspective, and then what type of data is being accessed. And really the zero trust models will support limiting access until we can trust the identity, the device, and then the authentication, and then the ultimate data access around it. So PCI DSS is the payment card industry data security standard, and it's obviously the standard and objective de facto standard for security controls in most organizations that have any type of regulatory oversight or interact with sensitive data. And PCI controls can relate easily to any type of sensitive data, any type of confidential data, and just making sure that you have a holistic data security set of controls in place. So from an access control perspective, it's really important to understand, who is in what groups do exist, what groups exist within Active Directory, what groups exist within applications, what groups exist within infrastructure and networks, and what does that give you access to, right, from an environment perspective, a data perspective, et cetera. So the access controls, the locations are really, really important to define what is in scope for a sensitive environment or a data environment that needs to be monitored and controlled. And one of the things that we regularly do with our clients is brainstorm with them and look at data flow diagrams, look at network diagrams, look at application workflows, and talk with them about, what is realistically the scope that they need to be concerned about, and where do they spend their time from an assessment perspective to make sure that we're covering any area that either transmits or stores or processes sensitive data. So this is really important to make sure that you continually have this conversation. Bring in your partners from an infrastructure service provider standpoint, bring in your partners from a cloud perspective, and make sure that you're continually looking at any mergers, acquisitions, new applications, new environment impacts from a data perspective, new third parties that you're bringing into the environment. But make sure you're updating your data flow diagrams, your network diagrams, and then also the narratives that support those, so you can make sure that you're starting out with the best footprint possible for what is your actual scope that you're trying to protect. And to support that, PCI has all of these specific requirements and sub-requirements that relate to creating data flows, creating network diagrams, creating these flows that you can understand, where's the data going, who has access to it, where's the access control configured, where are the logs related to who's accessing what, and then how do we make sure that we're enabling the configurations from a security perspective on those devices, from a firewall perspective, to not allow any type of connections into those devices unless it was initiated from that device. And then there's hardening configuration standards as well to make sure that any unnecessary services are disabled, any protocols are not supported that are not authorized, and any type of application whitelisting or application approval processes are implemented. as well as making sure that any default passwords and accounts are also disabled. So PCI is very specific and prescriptive on, what types of things should be looked for, identified, validated, and implemented. And these are just examples that are helpful to know. And as we continue through the PCI requirements, so antivirus would be requirement 5. And as I mentioned before, legacy antivirus is not sufficient. Any type of signature-based detection is not going to be sufficient. You're going to need to have a next generation endpoint capability to look at behaviors and processes and monitoring actually what's in memory. And also partner with somebody that can help you with a program around endpoints from a detection and response perspective, because when something happens, what are you going to do from a investigation, triage, and incident response capability? Requirement 6 is very important from a patch management perspective, 6.4 from a change management perspective. So any organization that has any type of change and release management policy is going to not only request that you submit a change request into a queue for approvals, they're going to make sure that you're doing those changes within approved time windows, and then they're going to allow those changes to be kept in place in the environment based on successful testing outside of the change window as they move back into a production environment. So as we continue in the PCI requirements, requirements 8 from an identification, authentication perspective, and this is where unique IDs are required and password complexity is implemented, making sure that there's no shared accounts, making sure that multi-factor is being enabled and used. Requirement 12 from a usage policy perspective, making sure there's a employee use policy and computer use policy, making sure that annual security awareness training is completed. Requirement 12.6. Megaplant IT offers free security awareness training to any organization that wants to sign up with us. And we also offer premium training that allows custom modules to be built for very specific types of users that may require more advanced training. But there's no excuse to not have security awareness training deployed and handled at least on an annual basis. And we see a lot of organizations doing more targeted and more frequent training that's more customized as well. And then making sure the background checks are done from requirement 12.7, and the depth and the number of panels that background checks can perform can obviously vary by industry and vertical and your specific policies. But making sure these background checks are done continuously and on a more frequent basis for sensitive roles is definitely something that's always helpful to have done. All right, let's talk about if you are undergoing an audit or an assessment, or somebody was looking at your security program, your technology stacks, your infrastructure providers, right? With COVID-19, obviously, on-site validation is not going to be an option. But what is allowed from an audit and assessment perspective is we can do the interviews, the evidence gathering, the sampling of systems and devices and environments, and we can do all of this remotely as long as it's done with a certain set of standards, a certain set of documentation, and with video capabilities of making sure that we validate who we're talking to, what their role is, and what they're responsible for. So all of the typical, on-site physical site review can be done with, the appropriate video support, as long as the validation is done from, the person, the role, and the resource that's providing that assistance and facilitation of the video capture capabilities, along with all of the typical evidence that's provided from a working papers perspective when we're looking at logs and audits and outputs and samples from the environment to make sure that everything is in place that should be in place. So just be aware that the on-site validation can be supported virtually and remotely, and this is something that is not slowed down. It's not provided any challenges or hiccups on any audits or assessments, And, this will probably be more the norm going forward. And, there will be on-site audits, obviously in the future to some degree, but I think we'll see more of a trend of trying to do as much as possible remotely and through video capture and, the remote evidence gathering, which was already part of our process from an audit and assessment perspective. So as we look at the new hybrid realities, 56% of the workforce holds a job that's compatible with remote work. And, you may say, well, why only 56% of the workforce that holds a job compatible with remote work? You have to take a look at, what's the role, what's the function? Is there on-site requirements of some kind, from a manufacturing or an on-site support perspective? Is there something that needs to be done physically on-site that can't be done remotely? But over half of the workforce holds a job compatible with remote work. Now, until COVID-19, 3.6% of the compatible workforce worked at home, either half-time or more. So 50% or more of the time, only 3.6% worked remotely. And I thought that this statistic would have been a little bit higher, but I think most technology organizations, software organizations, et cetera, this percentage probably is higher. But it's a pretty low percentage from a pre-COVID standpoint. Now, 48% of the workforce works in non-corporate offices during stay-at-home orders. Now, the number one objection allowing work from home is a management concern of we're going to lose control, we're going to lose the ability to observe, we're going to lose the ability to, enforce, everybody being productive, right? Now, I don't think this was, this does not turn out to be a true statement, but I think the concern is definitely there of how do we maintain the culture? How do we maintain the productivity? How do we maintain the positive work environment and support that a team provides, in a tight-knit office or a tight-knit area where, teams work within themselves. They also work across the organization with other teams. And there's always an ability to go down the hall and get the answer that you need, from someone that may be in a complementary role that that you need some input from. So the control issue was definitely a concern for management. Now, the next three sets of statistics are really for organizations that were falling behind, organizations that were average, and then organizations that were leading or advanced. So 27% of organizations had no continuity plan to accommodate working from home. And that's almost a third, which is pretty concerning from, no continuity plan to accommodate working from home. So that means that all of these organizations that did not have a plan had to quickly develop one, implement one, and support one. And this is something that we're going to be seeing continually, an effort of, help me review my environment, my technology stack, my remote workforce, sets of systems and applications, and make sure that I'm as secure as I can be from a configuration, deployment, data access standpoint. So 27% is definitely much higher than I would like to see that did not have a continuity plan in place. Now, 63% did have some plans in place, but they either lacked a technology, they lacked tooling, or they lacked some scalability to support working from home. So 63%, almost 2/3, had some type of plans in place, but they lacked either a technology or a tool to scale up. And we've seen this across the board of the pace and the speed at which they needed to enable remote capabilities, and the importance of going back into those environments and making sure that everything is configured as securely as possible, testing those environments from an application perspective, a network perspective, penetration testing perspective, to make sure that there's no holes that are not initially observed or initially aware of, but are providing some risk into that organization from a data access perspective. Now, 10% of the organizations from a leading perspective had mature remote working practices in place, which is great. So this would be advanced organizations that already had remote work policies, they already had remote work technology stacks, they already had a significant portion of the workforce on a remote platform. from a supportability perspective. They had logging and auditing in place. They had endpoint detection and response in place. They had network traffic analysis in place. And they also partnered with infrastructure providers to make sure that those applications are being delivered in a secure manner. So from a recommendation standpoint, developing new or leveraging existing strategic partnerships is really, really important. So finding partners that can grow with you, can expand with you, can strategize with you to make sure that the technology stacks are solid, the implementation of those technology stacks are secure, and ultimately we want to support quality work being performed, and we want to allow the businesses to grow. And we also don't want to have what we call, rogue or shadow IT happening within the business, because it creates not only support gaps, it creates visibility gaps into who's using what type of data is being accessed, and what type of data is being shared in ways that we were previously unaware of. So definitely want to find the right set of partners to work with that are nimble, that are able to not only assess their environments quickly, but also get you on the right path of people, process, technology, to make sure that you can support the quality of work, but also the long-term business growth. The second item is really around culture and supporting the team leaders to make sure that the changes of the hybrid workforce, the productivity of the hybrid workforce is in place, and making sure that the ecosystem is functioning from not only a business perspective, but a revenue standpoint, client support, implementing new products or services into the environment, and making sure that all of the interaction points, whether it's chat or video or email or remote interaction from a tooling perspective, is all done with supporting the business and supporting the profitability of the business. Number three would be digitizing and automating processes without disrupting the company culture, and making sure that the monitoring and the governance oversight is in place. And that's something that there's a lot of focus on artificial intelligence and machine learning and natural language processing and image recognition. And there's all kinds of different really good positive changes from an automation perspective, but you have to make sure while you're implementing that automation, you're not disrupting the core business processes, you're not creating data disparity of what decisions are being made by those automation platforms, and to make sure that the monitoring oversight is in place. Number four is really moving away from traditional data sharing platforms, file sharing platforms, making sure that you're using a SaaS-based platform from an availability perspective that's always on. And infrastructure providers are really, really good at providing these that are 100% uptime. But you also want to make sure that you're integrating with your identity and access management platforms, your multi-factor authentication. You have logging and auditing enabled, not only for your internal employees, but also for any client access that's provided through a portal or an API. And then also what kind of third parties and vendors you're sharing data with. Make sure that logging and auditing is fully enabled. Number five is interesting because it's secure access service edge. And this is a new set of technologies that converge and combine traditional network access and security access. So really the security access controls and the network access are really combined into a tighter group of roles and functions and access that allows you to segment and to put more controls around who can access what and under what conditions. But it really eliminates the open networks, the traditional VPN connections, which basically gives you full network access into an environment, and then data exfiltration risk. Something from a supply chain perspective is really important to make sure that you can leverage supply chains, you can leverage third parties, you can leverage partners to scale up and to provide very specialized services. But you also want to make sure the contracts are solid. You want to make sure that the third parties are compliant and that they have the appropriate auditing and monitoring in place to make sure that they can continue to provide their specialized services to you in a secure manner. And then the last recommendation is, the collaboration tools, right? So I use probably 5 or 6 different collaboration tools on a regular basis, depending on who I'm engaged with and who I'm working with. But we want to make sure, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Zoom or GoToWebinar or WebEx or Chime, whatever it is, make sure that those tools are implemented in a secure manner, make sure they're updated and patched like any type of software, and then also making sure that you're using encrypted data streams wherever possible. But this will also support productivity. It will also eliminate organizational confusion, and it also helps standardize. So those are the specific set of recommendations that we have with the new hybrid workforce. And I will turn it over to William. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all that, Mark. I think that the things that we are all starting to realize is that our organizations have to adapt, they have to change. You have to find ways to still be secure and compliant in that process. And we've been working with our partner community and Megaplant specifically for the last couple of years to build an enriched set of services. As I mentioned earlier, PhoenixNAP is an infrastructure company, right? We focus on high performance, highly available, geographically dispersed infrastructure deployments. We work to make our environments compliance ready, which means that we're not doing anything that will prohibit your compliance efforts, and we're taking that as far as getting ourselves audited by for SOC 2, for PCI. We do our own assessments for HIPAA, right? Making sure that we provide services that you can leverage to make it easier on your organization to become compliant. And Megaplant and our partners pick up the rest of that, and they can take you all the way there. And I think that that's the real important part of the partnership, right? They can help you get your business all the way to a compliant state with the auditing, with the readiness assessments, with the automated technology capabilities, the scannings, and the things like that. So I think that the takeaway that we can get out of this is infrastructure provided by PhoenixNAP, security services that are infrastructure related, are available in our security focused infrastructure products. And then companies like Megaplant can really take that to the next level. So, what does that look like for us, right? So everybody knows that we can provide secure co-location infrastructure. It's part and parcel to our brand. It's exactly what you might know if you've ever stepped foot in one of our facilities. We're pretty radical about the physical security components. We have focused our efforts for the last couple of years on building high security and compliance infrastructure services so that our customers can get that holistic approach to information security in a hosted infrastructure environment. And I think that is something that can be challenging when you're looking at the hyperscalers as an example, right? Where you're stuck doing everything yourself. Yeah, you're building some traditional app to do traditional security controls in what's essentially a PaaS or platform as a service product, not an infrastructure product. And you're ultimately having to go engage with specialized security vendors that can, help you inside the public cloud and the hyperscaler worlds, but it's often very, very expensive, right? Because they know that the expertise is lacking so much in the industry. Hybridity is hard, right? And so when we built Data Security Cloud 18 months ago, and as we expand that footprint worldwide to provide compliance and security focused and compliance ready infrastructure as a service and cloud hosting, we built that with the idea that you can lift and shift your workload from your on-prem. Maybe there's a refresh coming up. Maybe there's a new project that you want to do and you don't have the infrastructure for that. The answer is easier than, okay, I need to adopt an entire new mentality of consuming infrastructure as a service. If I go to Azure or Google or Amazon, I've got to learn this entire new platform. I've got to re-architect my applications, or it's going to cost me a truckload of cash, right? There is a better way. There is an easier way. There is a way to get natively hybrid IT. And that is leveraging technologies like Data Security Cloud to bridge the gap between cloud consumption and on-prem infrastructure, and doing that in a secure manner. And for some of you, you're still doing a lot of things yourself. You still are doing 80, 90% of the things yourself internally. You feel comfortable with that. You like that idea. You've allocated funding and budgeting to it for the next 5 years. But what I can confidently say is that when it comes to things like backup and disaster recovery, the as a service mentality is pretty much the only consideration. I have these conversations with folks and CIOs all over the world all the time about why DR as a service or why backup as a service versus doing it the way I've done it for years. And the reality of that is having and allocating capital and time to a piece of infrastructure and or large amount of infrastructure to sit in a data center only to hope to never use it is insane, right? I put the analogy out there. It would be like buying a second car just to sit in your garage in case you wreck your first car. No one does that. But yet people still feel compelled to build out disaster recovery and business continuity, technical business continuity environments themselves. And so, come have that discussion. Let's talk about ways that we can do security and compliance and marry that to infrastructure protection and availability. And I think the last one is just starting to understand the ways that we're going to weave security and compliance into automated infrastructure. And as we build out our new product sets, as we make the products and delivery of services that we've been doing for the last 10 years more on demand, more pay as you grow, more usage based, right? We don't want to sacrifice on security and compliance to make that a reality. And we're focused on delivering on that kind of promise. All right. I think Mark covered this really well. If you're using an infrastructure provider or a managed security or managed detection response provider that can't do these basics, you're probably not with the right company. So focus in on these: PCI, SOC, HIPAA, SSA 16, and the myriad of them available there. Next one, Mark. Not really able to click here. It's not working for me.
Yep.
All right, there we go. And then, as you look deeper into the portfolio, you look at Megaplan's capabilities and what they can do from a compliance perspective, and where they can help you get to from a security perspective, which I think is, business people on the call, I hear you, I understand compliance is the thing that, you feel can tangibly disrupt your business, but let me tell you, information security is way more important. And so I think that finding a provider like Megaplan that can do both of those things at the same time is very valuable. And then with that, I'm going to launch, I think it's time to launch our only poll question of the day. If you want to switch to the next screen there for me, Mark. We'll launch this poll up here. If you heard something today that you just want to have a conversation about, right? Let us know, and we'll reach out to you, and we'll work on it together, Megaplan and myself. If you have an auditing compliance or managed security services question, we'll make sure it lands in their hands. If you're interested in rethinking the way you do infrastructure today, maybe a more hybrid approach, maybe backup and disaster recovery as a service, go ahead and click the yes, and we will have someone reach out to you, and we'll have a really constructive conversation. I think that's the other thing, right? This isn't going to be just some sales guy calling you and saying, hey, what do you want to buy? We're here to have really constructive conversations with folks that find interest in the things that we're doing, and we're here to share the knowledge that we've been amassing as organizations, both Megaplan and PNAP, with you guys. And if you never want to do anything with us from a commercial perspective, please still keep coming to the webinars, listening to the things that we find are concerning people today, and what your peers are telling us about their capabilities, their decisions, and what they find valuable. So we'll go ahead and close that poll out here, and I'll open the floor for questions. So if anybody has any questions, I'll give it a couple minutes. I know we're at max time, so if you got one, toss it out. Burning a hole in your head, you can get it out. And if not, feel free to reach out. I know that our teams are standing by really to kind of talk about the tough questions and have the tough conversations. So don't be shy about that. All right, with that, thank you guys so much for everything. Hope you enjoyed the content. We'll be getting out slide decks and I think a recording of the webinar soon. I hope everyone stays safe. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll speak soon. Thank you.